Longevity Junkie. It's time to get your fix. I'm Nikki Lee.
I'm Buck Jaffrey.
And today we talk to Alcor CEO and Cryonics advocate James Arrowood. And we have a segment called Weird Wellness History. Well, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
How you doing, Buck?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. I have been wanting to do a glucose monitor, and I finally got it.
So tell me, what does it look like?
Oh, it's this guy.
Well, I know that, but what do your numbers look like?
Oh, my numbers, I'm an average 86.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I know. So I've been really monitoring it. I just love the gamification of everything, as we keep talking about on this show.
Yep.
So,
have you noticed anything interesting? Like, certain things spike your blood glucose that you wouldn't have thought of, or, that kind of thing?
Well, it's kind of hard when I'm already very specific with my diet. Yeah, I am. So, not too much. And also, I'm very, very good about understanding the order in which to eat to not spike my glucose. So for instance, I went to I was down in Orange County, and I went to my favorite breakfast burrito place that I've been going to since I was a kid. And I was like, oh, I know this is going to spike my blood sugar. And it was literally the day I got this monitor. And I even told the doctor, I was like, I think today we're going to spike. I was like, but I think I'll be good afterwards. And instead of just going and eating that burrito, I went to the grocery store and I bought myself an organic cucumber and some lettuce. I know I'm so weird. And I just ate the cucumber on my way to get the burrito. And then I sat there and ate the burrito, and everything was amazing. I ate, and it
it didn't do anything?
It didn't hyper spike. No, not at all.
No.
It went to 107.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not even a spike, really. It's
it
normal.
went up.
That's eating. That's eating.
Yeah,
it
went up.
Yeah. No, it's great actually for people particularly who are not as strict as you. Like, for example, I haven't used one in a while, but I'm definitely not as strict as you. And I know all the rules, but I just don't follow them because I'm not, I just, it's like one of those things. It's like eating for me is like a major joy, right? So I know the rules.
What are you talking about?
I know, but I just can't play by all the rules,
I know.
I can play by them most of the time. Maybe I shouldn't, probably about 60%, 70% of the time. But yeah, I mean, and I've been super stressed lately too, so I've been hitting the ice cream with my kids and stuff like that. But yeah, look, some of the things that you were referring to, just so people know, in general, if you don't want to spike your blood glucose, you don't want to you don't want to eat the thing that has the most simple sugars in it first, right? So in your case, what you're talking about, the burrito is going to have some rice in it and starchy stuff, and potatoes and the actual,
and the sauce actually that you put on it. No one really understands there's so much sugar in sauces. Even hot sauces and things like that, there's so much sugar, or at least more sugar than you would even assume. So if you're going to sauce things up, which I love sauces, trust me, but you got to just make sure you cushion it.
Yeah. So the idea is if you eat something, like in Nikki's case, she talked about cucumbers. If you eat that first, you're essentially creating slower absorption of that blood sugar that comes in after. If you I kind of think about it as almost like a physical barrier, right?
Literally. You literally start with fiber.
Yeah. And so you're kind of making it more difficult for your intestines to absorb that blood sugar, and therefore it won't go in really quickly and spike. And spikes in blood sugar are probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, daily hazard to longevity, period.
Yeah, I feel like it ages you faster, right?
Yeah. With those blood sugar spikes, basically what happens is I kind of think about it as blood sugar is fine. You need it in your blood, but when it gets high, it's sticky. It's like slimy stuff that sticks onto proteins that you need. And so one other piece to this is, I don't know if you ever got your hemoglobin A1C tested.
I have to go look at all my little blood tests.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're seeing it on a day-to-day basis, right? But the hemoglobin A1C, I just mentioned how the proteins in your body get slimed, right? they call it glycation. That's the
Oh.
fancy word for the sliming. And
Oh.
hemoglobin, of course, is what carries oxygen in your red blood cells. But um, when you have a higher amount of blood sugar, more percentage of those hemoglobin molecules get slimed. And when they get slimed, they're called hemoglobin A1C, right? So you get a test basically, and that tells you, like, over the last 3 months, what your average of your blood sugar was, which is probably a much more useful indicator for most people than testing day to day. And why 3 months? Because red blood cells live for about 3 months. So you can tell as a percentage of your cells. For example, in my opinion, the target to be really healthy is have a hemoglobin A1C of less than 5.2%, meaning less than 5.2% of the hemoglobin molecules in your body have been slimed, right? So, and that'll equate to an average blood glucose of less than 100, which, yours is probably going to be sub 5, below 5 for sure, based on what you're talking. But anyway, that's a great test to get. It's a really, really good test to get. In fact, that's how those tests are the tests that you use to define, pre-diabetes and diabetes and all that stuff. So,
Yep. I'm just getting ahead of the game.
yeah, for sure. That's fantastic. So what do we got going on here today?
Well, speaking of things we can kind of do for our health or think we can do for our health, in this segment of Weird Wellness History, I have this story for you that is kind of shocking. Okay. So at the turn of the 20th century, radioactive elements like radium and thorium were brand new, mysterious, and exciting. Scientists had just discovered them, and nobody fully understood how dangerous they were. So naturally, the wellness world went wild. Enter radium spas. These were, I can't even believe this. I'm like, what is happening? These were actual wellness resorts built around naturally radioactive hot springs, especially in places like Montana and Germany, where people go all the time for all these wellness hot springs and things like that, which is mind-boggling. But people were actually soaking in the glowing water, believing it could cure
I mean,
arthritis, improve
seems magical,
circulation.
right?
I mean, if Instagram was back then,
Oh,
they'd be like all over and everyone would go, right?
everybody be dead.
Everybody. Oh my God. So they were believing it cured arthritis, that it improved circulation, it rejuvenated the skin, and even extended life. But then it didn't stop there. You could buy Radiathor, which is a patent tonic of distilled water with real radium. And it marketed as a miracle drink to restore vigor and vitality. And it was basically a radioactive Red Bull, which Red Bull's already freaking radioactive.
Yeah.
But people drank it daily. And the most famous case, get this. Okay, so this guy called Eben Byers, who was a wealthy industrialist and athlete, took 1,400 bottles of Radiathor over 3 years. And he called it his secret weapon for strength and energy until his teeth started to fall out and also chunks of his jaw.
Yeah.
I can't even. Oh my God.
Well, in that case, the reason for that, radium in particular, it mimics calcium. It's just like calcium.
Wow.
And it's going to be used preferred over calcium. And so basically what's happening is, like, the stuff's getting into the bone.
Oh my
and
God.
his teeth are falling off, his jaw's falling. Yeah.
Well, he died in 1932, and the Federal Trade Commission launched a full investigation, kind of thank God, because his death was so gruesome, and it led to the banning of radioactive products in consumer health. But what? Like, that just makes me be like, okay, wait, what is all the rage right now? And, like, what is actually
you're
not good for us?
right? I mean, to a certain degree, we always kind of run into those kind of things.
Yeah, the fad, right?
Yeah. I mean, to a lesser extent, even if it's not super dangerous, this has been something for me, like, over the years that is kind of shaken my own belief system, because it seems like every time we in science and medicine, we believe something, we find out that we're wrong like 10 years later, and it's like we're totally wrong. I mean, I think that, for example, like in the 90s, And then the early 2000s, there was this thing called a Pritikin diet. There was a study, and it showed that, people who were on a low fat, high carb diet were less likely to, have cardiovascular disease. So everybody was on this, like
Huh.
everybody, that was like the big thing. If you go even look at like workout TV, like the
Mm-hmm.
Richard Simmons and
Mm-hmm.
all those guys, they're talking about like, high carb, low fat the whole time. And the next thing you
Interesting.
know, we're in this world now where we're like, do not eat carbs because they will, slime or don't eat a lot of carbs. You're going to slime your body and you're going to die early. So anyway, yeah, it is kind of shocking. But back to radiation.
No, it's crazy. I can't even. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's really crazy.
Yeah. So, like just in terms of radiation, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a couple of types. There's called, ionizing radiation, which is the really bad one. And that's the way it works is basically by damaging DNA. And there's non-ionizing radiation, which generally people think of is less harmful. I'm not completely convinced of that. I mean, no, it is less harmful, but I'm not convinced it's as benign as people think because it includes things like cell phones and microwaves. The
Oh, we
problem,
really
yeah, well,
should
so
limit our intake of those for sure.
yeah, I mean, cell phones in particular, it's interesting
For sure.
because there's no study that like really shows a huge link to like brain cancer and things like that.
Well, because I feel like
But
it hasn't been around long enough.
well, here's the problem, right? So like I've known like so being in neurosurgery, even back in medical school, one of my professors was convinced that it was going to cause brain tumors in a big way. The problem is that like in order to prove that, you have to have such a huge study to show the statistical significance of that,
Mm,
that no one's going to do it. No one's going to do
yeah.
it.
I know.
So
Well, no one's going to do it anyway because they're so addicted to their TikTok and they're so
yeah,
addicted to doing things and showing the world, what they're doing all the time. It's just not in people's daily life. And kids, especially now, I mean, I swear their second hand is the phone,
yeah,
you know?
right. Ionizing radiation and radiation exposure. So it's measured in millisieverts. And just for reference, like if you're just living a normal, like there's background radiation in the
Mm-hmm.
world, right?
For
So
sure.
you're already looking at about 3 millisieverts per year of exposure just
Yeah.
from living. Okay. And
Yeah, I know.
so the general consensus is like you want to try to get less than, an additional millisievert from other stuff. When we talk about other stuff, it's like, CT scans, for example.
Mm-hmm.
CT scans, you might get like a couple of millisieverts just from one head CT. I mean, the
Yeah.
reality is that, these are things that you need because
Mhm.
but they're not good to get a bunch of
Yeah.
this stuff. So
I
other
think also
things,
those
yeah,
the airport scanners that have that like vroom thing go in front of you, like that whole
yeah,
it looks like a whole like CT scanner MRI machine that you're basically stepping in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like dental scans, I don't let like,
Where they put the big lead jacket on
yeah,
you.
I don't like them doing dental x-rays on my kids. I'm like, when I was a kid, we
Hmm.
didn't do that. They just poked at the teeth until one of them was soft and that was a cavity. So I don't actually let them do that to my kids.
It's
And
kind of
personally,
like
I
a
don't.
little too late. I mean, the whole point is to find it early.
Right. Well, I guess so. But then you'd
Yeah.
have to do the x-rays to do it,
But I
right?
get it. I mean, and you don't have to do it as often as they might suggest. And plus, it's very expensive depending if you have dental insurance or whatever. But a lot of these things are expensive. And so, and we don't, I like to be I like to be more old school. So like you were saying, like you didn't have this done when you were a kid and you turned out fine type of thing. And you're just not doing all these overindulgences. And yeah, I mean, I also know that it's in some of our like foods and water. Like water holds so many like heavy metals and things like that that we're not even aware of. It's so water is so tough.
Yeah, well, and then again, it is really around us everywhere. I mean, and you
Mhm.
were talking about the scans at the airport.
Yep.
I mean, airplanes, flying in airplanes, you get
Mm.
cosmic radiation. And typically, if you think of pilots flying like 900 hours per year. I mean, they're getting an extra 4 or 5 millisieverts per year. I mean, so that is an occupational hazard for those people who are on airplanes for a living, right? Yeah. Radon gas. I don't know. Like I'm just in the process of just in a real estate acquisition, and you'll have these disclosures and all that. There used to be a lot of stuff with radon gas. Radon gas can emit ionizing radiation, so that's another thing to make sure.
Wait, what's radon gas exactly?
It's like you know what? It's like something that, like in basements mostly, that you get a lot more in sort of the Midwest where you have basements and old houses and stuff like that.
Is it because you like tap deeper into the ground or something?
I guess so. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. I just know it's something that we had to, that you always have to sign off on and get tested and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so bottom line is interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we just got to really, we always should look to the past for takeaways and, ways to learn, and, things happen so that we can learn from them. So I feel like we also just have to be aware of cumulative exposure, and just, I don't know, just make good decisions, people. Listen to this show and make good decisions.
And if you make the wrong decisions, you might make the decision to get frozen right after your death.
Well, that's definitely something we can talk about next. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk to the CEO of Alcor Cryonics, James Arrowood. Welcome back, Longevity Junkie. It's time for our guest interview. It's The Breakdown with James Arrowood. James Arrowood is the CEO of Alcor Cryonics and a passionate advocate for life extension. As an attorney and longtime supporter of cryonics, he has dedicated his career to advancing the idea that death doesn't have to be the end. With a focus on ethical responsibility, legal clarity, and public education, Arrowood champions the right to choose preservation and fights to legitimize cryonics as a serious scientific and humanitarian pursuit. Thank you for joining us, James.
Thank you.
Well, this is a very shocking topic. I'm super excited to dive into this with you. But we're going to have to start from the basics, because even I had to ask the basics. What is cryonics, and what is Alcor, and what's its mission?
Okay. So cryonics in general was once considered kind of a pseudoscience, but what it really relates to scientifically is using ultra cold temperatures to preserve the viability of human tissue in particular. And it works for animals. It already works for humans, which is very poorly understood, but it already works. So people who say this is crazy and this is pseudoscience, they're just wrong. Scientifically, factually, they're wrong. And I'll explain that in a minute. So Alcor is an organization it's a nonprofit. That's incredibly important, because there are a number of for-profits that are suddenly emerging. The problem is this is probably impossible to do and make a profit at right now because of scale issues. So to do it using the state-of-the-art, which is experimental chemicals and equipment, it's extraordinarily expensive. In fact, Alcor loses money about 50% of the cases that we recover. We're actually 60% funded by donors and donations. So that's another big thing that's misunderstood. A lot of people hear the price tag. It's about $200,000 to cryopreserve a whole body, and they assume that there must be a lot of meat on that bone and profit to be made, and there just isn't. The only way to make a profit is to use much cheaper processes and chemicals, and they don't show the same results that we see.
Well, we can get into all that, but I think it would be helpful just to start out with some very basic stuff, right?
Sure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of the history of cryonics? Like whose idea was this, and what inspired it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. First of all, go way back, right? The Egyptians were doing mummies and trying to preserve bodies. Mm-hmm. And so really it's a question of modality, which is what can you use to do this? Benjamin Franklin actually came up with kind of the initial idea, which was seeing, a dead bird frozen in the snow, and the flesh was preserved. So would it be possible to do this with humans? But of course, they didn't have electricity or electrical refrigeration at that time. And so the next best thing was alcohol. He knew a lot about alcohol. He was a brewer and knew a lot about wine. And frankly, he came up with the idea of alcohol preservation, which is what modern day embalming essentially uses. Because he had two ideas, one of which he could effectuate and one of which he didn't have the tools for. That's often the case in emerging tech. So Alcor, a gentleman, Robert Ettinger, wrote a book, 1964, called The Prospect of Immortality, which I personally hate that wording, because this is not about immortality, and anybody who tells you it is wrong scientifically. Okay,
Okay.
that's just wrong. That's untrue. So I don't like that being used in cryonics because I think it takes away from our credibility, frankly. But it is about longevity, and it is about, Ettinger really was talking about, why can't we apply scientific principles that we know work? For instance, you put a steak in the freezer and it's not going to last forever, but you can take it out a month later and it still tastes good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so the concept was in 1964, but scientists didn't really make efforts until 1972, which was Fred and Linda Chamberlain, who are the founders of Alcor. They met, fell in love, and Fred was a NASA scientist. So he was actually an actual engineer that developed rocket engines, essentially. And you can see that in the design. It's pretty cool. You can actually see that history in our doers. But he dealt with thermodynamic engineering. So literally heat and cold transfer on a scientific basis. And then Linda was studying biology at UCLA. And they said, well, why don't we actually make efforts to really do this thing? So Alcor was founded in 1972 and was I think the first really organized effort to apply hard science principles to try and make this happen. And like a lot of emerging technologies, what it was lacking was what I call complementary technologies. So the electric vehicle, the Tesla, doesn't exist. Elon Musk doesn't get rich unless there was some scientist developing a battery that was much more efficient. And it's the battery that's the key to the whole operation. So in cryonics, there's really two keys to the whole operation. One is the cryoprotective agent, the chemical, and the other is the mechanical processes. And those are really coming into their own in the last 5 years. So developments in emerging technology are catching up, which they often do. And you see that in Tesla, and it becomes widespread and
Mm-hmm.
mainstream. And we're now seeing that in cryonics. That's why you're hearing about it. That's probably why you're talking about it. It was kind of a fringe thing because the science hadn't caught up yet. And that's
So,
where we are today. And that's what I'm doing is making it work on a broader
so,
scale.
so what I'm gathering is, at the end of life, instead of like cremating, going up in flames, basically, then you're talking about going the polar opposite and freezing the body.
Right. Because, and I'm going to blow your mind here. You probably haven't thought of it in this way before,
Okay.
but when you die from most causes, your brain is not like immediately shut off. It's not like a
No.
switch that's shut off. Your
Mm-hmm.
consciousness is shut off because of lack of oxygenation. But if we were to take a biopsy of your brain cells and put them in a petri dish, those cells could live. They'd be alive and they'd be viable
For how
for a number
long?
of hours. For a
Uh-uh.
number of hours.
Okay.
And so it kind of becomes similar to when people used to have a heart attack in the 1940s. There was no way to restart electrical activity in the 1940s. Okay, we all recognize that. But ultimately, somebody came up with a defibrillator, which stops the heart and restarts the electrical activity. So science found a way to kind of keep that going. And as long as your heart isn't too damaged, meaning the cells aren't dying, then the heart could live again, as it were, and restart. So the notion is that your brain cells, as long as you capture them in a viable state at the time of death, before ischemic damage actually destroys them, theoretically, there's no scientific reason, if you repair what stopped the oxygenation to the brain, that brain couldn't be kickstarted back again.
So when somebody dies, can you just take us through a legitimate step-by-step process?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So look, this is really contingent upon replacing the blood in the body with a medical grade antifreeze, essentially. That's really, really important, really critical. Because, just like with burning where you carbonize cells and they turn into carbon, in the reverse case, if you just froze a body, that's a misnomer. That's a misunderstanding. You don't just turn somebody into ice. The ice will actually destroy your cells. And you know biology, most people know the body is 70% water roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you put a water bottle in the freezer, it expands, or you put a soda can in the freezer, it explodes, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
in the body, that has the effect. Your cells are actually mostly proteins and fats. So mitochondria, DNA, Golgi bodies, which are oils, and oils and water don't mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your cells are surrounded by water, and when they freeze, the cells are crushed.
Okay.
Okay. That's what causes the damage from the freezing process. So the notion is that if we replace most of the water in the body with something that doesn't expand when it freezes, those cells can stay alive so long as they're not attacked by bacteria, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
or chemical processes, heat, what's ischemic damage, swelling. And so that's what we do. And we do that when at the time of death, if we have notice, which often we do, you die of a terminal disease like cancer or something, um, our team will be bedside, and we don't touch a body until a third party declares death. Obviously we don't want to get involved with that.
Mm-hmm.
But once you're declared legally dead, that means there's nothing medically they can do to continue life for you. But that doesn't mean your brain is actually dead. That's the irony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is not dead at that time necessarily. So our
Yeah.
goal is to replace the blood in your body with a cryoprotective agent that allows us to then hypercool the cells to keep viability of those cells.
So the
Um,
person dies and what, you inject them with something?
yeah, I wouldn't say inject. We actually start essentially an IV, what you
Okay.
would think of as an IV.
Okay.
And just like you would get let's say a blood transfusion or something, we're actually taking the blood out and we're replacing it with this, what's called a CPA for short, or cryoprotective agent, which is an
Okay.
extraordinarily expensive synthetic chemical that prevents ice formation. So it allows us to hypercool your body to prevent bacterial growth and prevent
You-
swelling damage and ischemic damage. But at the same time, it doesn't expand when it hypercools. So it doesn't cause the mechanical injury to the cells.
So how does it actually flow though if your heart's not pumping
Right.
the blood through
We,
the
again,
thing?
as part of this process, we're actually continuing CPS, or cardiopulmonary support, which
Mhm.
Oh,
throws people off because they see us doing what they think is CPR, which stands for
resuscitating. Yeah.
resuscitation. We're keeping the oxygen to the brain by inserting a vent. So we put a ventilator inside the mouth
Okay. Yeah.
and
See, step by
into the
step. We want
lungs.
to know all of these
Yeah.
things.
It's really detailed.
Yeah,
And
I
we
love it.
probably don't even have enough time here for that. But our team is highly trained. Okay. So we have what's called a DART team, deployment and recovery team. We have a standby list. We have a watch list. They travel anywhere in the world our members are located. Ideally, they're bedside with about 5 Pelican cases. And these cases hold highly experimental engineered pumps, sensors. They hold this chemical, which the chemical alone for a body costs about $50,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
That's the price of the chemical. So we're not making money on top of that. That is what it costs us to have this synthetic ice blocker created. That's the chemical they'll start to perfuse into your body. They're pumping, they're taking scientific measurements, and then they're trying to cool your body. But it's not as simple as let's just dunk you in ice. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really work that way. You have to cool the body at an extremely kind of controlled rate,
Mm-hmm.
and your head loses body heat a lot faster than your torso. Okay.
Okay.
But we don't want your torso and your head to be cooled in a drastically uneven way, because that's going to cause shearing damage on a molecular level. All right. It's really a lot going on.
Very scientific. Yeah, lots going
Yeah.
on.
And we're measuring the temperature as like every minute of the process. There's actually sensors that'll go into your head and go into your body.
Oh my God.
And this is all being measured and monitored by a nurse. Typically we have a fire person and a special forces military person
Mm-hmm.
that's also trained in medicine or medical techniques, and they're part of the team that recovers your body.
But what if you don't die in a hospital? Like, what if you're
Right.
just out there and you're a member of Alcor, which I'm assuming just means that you're choosing to be preserved, cryopreserved after you die. Is
Right.
that what a
This
member
is
is?
I call it the
Okay.
third way, right? So
Okay.
if you get buried, you're probably going to get eaten by worms or turn to dust. We know that.
Yeah.
If you get cremated, you're going to get burned up.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's a form of final disposition legally, because we can't revive anybody. We fully admit that. But the team is there to preserve your body in the best way possible. If you don't die in a hospital, then there's a whole bunch of variables there. And the answer is it depends. Like if you die in the jungle, we're not going to get to you in time, other than to do what's called a straight freeze. Okay. And the straight freeze is the least ideal way to do it, but we still do that. And that's where we just cool your body without the cryoprotective agent. If you don't die in a hospital, if you die at home, but your body is discovered within a certain number of hours, we can still try and get that cryoprotective agent into your body or to your brain. And it depends on the number of hours, and it depends on your own medical situation. We need your circulatory system open in order to perfuse the fluids. So if your circulatory system is open, we can still perfuse you. And that's a variable. It depends.
Can you, just going back to, what you said about one thing I want to try to understand a little bit is the actual time when you're doing this, because you mentioned something to the effect of when you're dead, you're not brain dead. The reality is that, I'm a physician. There's two ways that you are either cardiopulmonary death or brain death. And, the vast majority of deaths that I've certainly dealt with is in the neurosurgery side has been brain death. But it seems to me that there's kind of a very small window there. Even if you're brain dead, you're going to have damage in that brain. There's no question about it, right? It's not to say that it's not an argument that sometime down, 50, 100 years from now, that there will not be ways to, fix some of that damage. But maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the invariable damage that you are going to have, that you're just kind of going in there knowing, like, regardless, vitrification is what the process is, I believe, the antifreeze thing. What do what's sort of inevitable? Like, what damage is, like, you going in there knowing, yeah, you're definitely going to have that.
Again, if you're a physician, you understand science is a large number of variables, right? You need an N of greater than one. And that's part of what we're doing at Alcor. We're doing the research to look at the variables related to all of these, these things that we can't control, meaning the cause of death. So if you have a stroke, right, your brain is already damaged. We know that. The other problem with a stroke in particular for us is that circuit is not going to be complete in the brain. So we're not going to get a good perfusion for at least part of the brain, wherever the stroke is located.
Yeah, just so people understand that, the reason is that basically a stroke by definition is kind of a blockage in a major artery feeding the brain. So if you're blocking that and you're trying to put in this fluid that is trying to preserve your brain, it's not going to work.
Right. That fluid's not going to get to that part of the brain. And we fully admit that. Like when you sign up at Alcor, you're actually donating your body under the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. You're donating it for scientific research. So I want to make that clear. Unlike the for-profits where they're intimating that, this is going to work in 100 years or something like that, we're very explicit that we don't know if this will work for you or for anybody. And it largely depends in some circumstances on the cause of death and how you died. So even worse, I would say, than a stroke is when we get somebody who has a burst aneurysm. And for those who don't know, a burst aneurysm is when your blood vessels break and then fluids just go anywhere. They don't actually go in the circuit. So your circulatory system is a circuit. And if that circuit's blown, we're not going to get that cryoprotective agent to a lot of your body, depending on where it is. So those are all variables. And we had a call this morning. It was about a 3-hour conference with medical doctors on the call. One of whom is an interventional radiologist who's prominent out here. We actually work with a neurosurgeon. There's a neurosurgeon that wants to use some of our work for epilepsy research on the brain. So we fully acknowledge that there's going to be cases where the brain death and the cause of the brain death will result in certain parts of the brain not getting perfused, or, less good outcomes. And we use CT scans, and we're now at the point where we're coordinating with interventional radiologists, medical doctors who look at images, to actually study differences in outcomes based upon either causes of death or variables to time, what we call time to temperature. So the time to temperature plays a massive role in this.
So that's your outcome, by the way.
The time to temperature is the measurable outcome.
Right. So
And
the
then,
quicker that is, the
yeah.
more likely, in your view, that you're preserving tissue.
Well, we see that in CT scans. It's not a hypothetical, it's demonstrable. We can actually see in the CT scans differences, between, say, immediate cryoprotective agent perfusion versus usually about 12 hours is the window. So you asked me specifically. I don't like to say specifically because there's so many variables, because it also has to do with how old you are, what your general health is, your weight, your body mass index. If you're 90 pounds or 300 pounds, what about the gender variables, women versus men? There's a lot of differences here. And we're studying those differences to see what procedures work better for different variables.
How do you know that any of this already works? You said that there has been success with humans. How do you know? And what exactly is the end goal here? Like, are you trying to preserve so that you can revive a consciousness of somebody and have that live on? Or what's the end goal here?
That's what I call the aspirational goal. There are people involved in cryonics who are in the media a lot, who that's all they talk about. They talk about that their brain's going to come back as a robot, or they're going to be an artificial intelligence computer system or something. I'm running an organization that's focused on the preservation to make that possible someday. It's not possible today. Fully acknowledge that. Before we get there, though, what's I think significant is that we need to test on scale. Meaning, before you get to the Jetsons car that's flying around every city, you have to do a whole bunch of other things first and do them well, so they're not all crashing into each other in the air. Okay. And the electric car and the efficient battery and the low weight battery is really important. So what I'm focused on right now for the short-term goals, as opposed to the aspirational goals, are organ banking and organ preservation. That's part of what we're looking at Alcor. So we're actually actively looking at kidneys right now. And kidneys have been done in mammals on a small scale. So rabbits and rats, this is Journal of Nature, Bischoff at University of Minnesota, completely independent of cryonics. He did it, I believe, in rats. Fahey did it in rabbits. And then what I was referencing in humans, by the way, was actually not a full human. What I was talking about was like embryos. So IVF, and you're probably too young to remember this, but in the 80s, people literally went on talk shows like Phil Donahue and said, if you were born from an embryo that was frozen in liquid nitrogen, you'd have no soul or consciousness. They thought they would be zombies.
Oh my God.
No, look this up. It's wild.
Yeah,
people are
that's
talking
wild.
about it.
Well,
but they really thought that. Some people thought that and talked about it. But we know embryos, and hold on, because I know where you're going to go with your debate here. but hold on, I'll address it ahead of time.
They're not coming.
Embryos conceptually, okay, they're stored in liquid nitrogen. This in a similar fashion that our patients are stored, our members are stored. Those embryos undoubtedly, are thawed, implanted, and become fully sentient human beings with full consciousness, fully developed brains. The point of that is embryos are very simple cellular structures. And that's what you're going to mention.
That's exactly what I'm going to say. And I think,
of course,
and I would say everything that you said up to now made a lot of sense to me until you just said that, because we're talking about, just multicellular, just little bunches of cells, right? Like, yes, of course you can make that, but I think that is a hell of a leap.
No. I'm not making that leap. What I'm actually agreeing with you. And what I'm saying is when I look at any kind of development of emerging technology, which is my specialty in my career, I teach all over on this stuff. Every single one of those conceptually starts on a micro scale. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is very simple, but you agree with me unquestionably that embryos are done liquid nitrogen, stored for a long period of time.
What I will say is this, is that I'm actually familiar with the research that you're talking about with Dr. Fahey. In fact, I actually interviewed him for another podcast. We spoke specifically about cryonics and its benefit in the potential real benefit in organ transplant, right? We talked about how essentially instead of, having to rush this organ in and then potentially having that person reject the organ, Dr. Fahey's research actually involves manipulating the immune system, and that takes time. So what he's saying is you can take this organ, you can freeze it for a period of time while a person's immune system acclimates to some of those cells, and then you can put it in. And what that to me is a hell of a lot more compelling, because now you're talking about a complex organ system that you can actually use, right? And that has been frozen and that is viable. But I think the challenge and the leap, and I'm not saying it's not possible and it'll never be possible. I'm never going to say that. I'm just saying that that's still a very small step into completely, making a human being come back from.
I'm in total agreement with you.
Right. Right.
I'm literally, I'm the president of the premier Cryonics organization. I'm in total agreement with you. It's a massive leap to say you're going to go from an embryo to then a kidney in a rat, to then a kidney in a human, to then a brain, to then a whole body.
Right.
Total agreement with you. So there's no controversy there. The controversy arises, I think, when you do get people who get overexcited about the aspirational goal, and then they go into the media because the media loves this stuff, and they're out there promising that in 50 years we're going to flash freeze you, cure your cancer, and then bring you back. No, that's not how this works in reality. And I want to use an example, the electric car again. The first electric car was 1909. It was a French scientist. Yeah, I see you raising your eyebrows.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people realize that. But it wasn't practical. It wasn't applicable at scale for 100 years later, like 2009 with the Tesla, right?
Yeah.
That is how this stuff works. You have to start, it was an embryo, and then it was a rat kidney and a rabbit kidney. And what I'm telling you is what Alcor is actively working on in our research environment today is human-sized kidneys. Because I know that we shouldn't even be talking about the brain until we can show proof of concept with even a kind of a simpler, even though the kidney is a little bit complex actually, but we need to be able to do a kidney for organ banking. That is a huge societal goal. Fahey has one approach. There's actually multiple approaches on the medical side in terms of, he's looking at the immune system, what you're talking about, anti-rejection. We're looking at AI doing DNA matching. And I've talked to the transplant surgeons like at different universities in the country, and they need about 6 weeks is what they're telling me. They need 6 weeks to have a kidney, on ice, as it were. And if they get 6 weeks and can do a biopsy that's put into a computer and match up on the DNA, they think they can largely resolve a lot of the rejection issues, which, transplants are about 60% rejection rate after 2 years, which people don't know about. You can get your kidney, be on the list, and then you're still, in trouble because you got to take a bunch of drugs that might give you lymphoma later. So we're working on that subset today, but preserving the whole body because somebody has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Like somebody has to do it.
That makes sense. Fair. What's the, I would imagine in the last few years that, that there has been, you've gone from a completely, a scientific, audience fringe to, well, maybe, and then all of a sudden you're talking about the role of this stuff in organ transplantation, which seems extremely practical. So can you talk a little bit about how the opinions of science have changed toward cryonics in general?
Yeah, thank you. I only came to this about 2.5 years ago, just so you know. So
Hmm.
I'm actually not from the cryonics kind of traditional universe. I was brought in by the board of Alcor to reorient Alcor's research kind of away from the more, you know, speculative stuff we've talked about, or the aspirational goals, and focus on some of the things we're talking about. I'm an attorney by trade. I have over 20 years as an attorney. The reason I mention that is I'm privy to things that are what we call attorney-client privilege, and that means I hear material non-public information. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, Worked with a number of medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies in my career. And then Alcor was kind of a fringe client of mine because most lawyers didn't know what to do with emerging tech fringe companies. When I was hired, the reason I took the job, because I made a lot more money as an attorney in the private sector, is because I was astounded at the level of emerging tech leaders and scientists that are confidentially working on this. They're in what I call stealth mode. So there's a whole bunch of stealth mode stuff going on around in this universe, and they don't want to talk about it because in the academic environment, they're concerned that it'll blemish their mainstream credibility. You know, they might be at a major university here, there, or somewhere else, and then Alcor has these people that are confidential members that are some of the leading scientists or technology people on Earth, but they can't admit it. And I took the job because it was going to give me an opportunity to interact with those people. And part of that is recognizing that these people are smarter than I am. They're more connected than I am. They know things that I don't know about the progression of the science behind the scenes. And many times in emerging technology, it seems like something just popped up. Like this cell phone, 30 years ago was a complete fantasy. It didn't exist. And again, Nikki, you're probably too young to know this, but like the original Star Wars, they could go to warp speed in different galaxies, but they talked on the walkie-talkie. They didn't even, the Hollywood people couldn't even imagine this thing. So this science is in that same category. To address your point, I will tell you that some of the world's preeminent, meaning the people who have won all the prizes in math or physics or biology, they're behind a lot of this stuff, but they're not public about it. And that kills me. I wish they were public because it would really expedite, grants and other things. But I get it. They have to protect their reputation in the mainstream old school academia. It's frustrating, though. It is frustrating, but they're advising me. I have advisors in this stuff.
Hey, can I ask you a question? Can you, real quick, just in terms of that science, is there any animal model where you take something alive and you vitrify it and then you thaw it? Does it come back out alive? Do you know what I mean? Like, at least it sort of tells me if in an animal model, if you took an animal, so it's like a rat or something that we do plenty of bad things to, but in this case, we infuse it with this solution and then we, unfreeze it, so to speak. Will it still be alive?
I want to be careful addressing that. Alcor doesn't do like live animal research.
Well, I know you guys don't do it. I'm just
we
wondering
don't do
if you
that.
know of any research out there that does that.
I'm aware of some things and have seen some things just being in the space. I don't know how credible they are, so I want to be cautious about that. But I have seen some things that, there's video of things. I'm sure people could Google or what have you, of mammals, small mammals, that have allegedly been cryopreserved for at least an hour or two and then revived.
But no laboratory studies on that. Okay.
Other than the stuff Fahey and Bischoff were doing with the rabbits and things like that. But, I've seen them. I don't know how credible those videos are.
So what if I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of this, to be quite honest with you, because first of all, I'm like, how do you even pitch this to somebody? Is this like, hey, you're donate, kind of like, the donor sticker on our license, like, hey, you're going to be preserving, we're here for a nonprofit. We're trying to, I don't know, in hopes be able to preserve your body and bring you back to life? Or are you saying, hey, we're going to be doing research with your body so that we can, I don't know, take your organs and donate it? Because if we figure out a process in which it can match somebody and save someone's life, like, why would people spend, because you said it's like $200,000 to do the whole body, right? And I'm assuming you can also just do the head, which I think I even heard from another interview. You can just do the head for like $90,000 to what sounds like preserve like the consciousness or whatever, like you said, to bring back into robots or something. But like, what is the pitch here? And why would somebody put the money out to do anything like this? And what can you promise at all?
Okay. A lot
I
packed in
know.
there.
My bad.
First of all, I'm not pitching you anything. We're a nonprofit. If you sign up, I don't get a bonus. It's not like sales where there's a commission. Don't sign up if you don't want to do it. Don't
What?
sign up.
Yeah.
If you do not want to be preserved and be part of this experiment, I call this the Apollo moon landing of biology. That's what it is. We are explicit in that we do not promise revival. Okay, that is not promised. In fact, there's probably 10 pages of disclaimers that this may never work, and right now shows no indication it's ultimately going to work.
Okay.
So I want to be very clear about that. My interest in it personally, and I have a little bit of a cheat code, is, okay, let's talk about donating your body to science, because you mentioned on your driver's license, you donate your organs.
Yeah.
What's very, very poorly understood is that when you donate your body to science, you have no control over what your body actually goes to get used for.
Yes.
And in fact, there's a good documentary on this. You know this with medical school. You end up in a gross anatomy lab. Your head might be cut off for dental school training. Worse yet, for some people, you might be strapped to a tree with your body with grenades attached to it and blown up for weapons research. Okay? You literally have no control over what happens to your body when you donate it that way. As an organ procurement thing, if your organs are viable, which is a big if, depends on how you die and depends on circumstances, then they should go to organ transplantation. But even those are wasted at a very high rate. Okay. So Alcor's deal with you is you donate your body, and you talk about the price. I'll address that in a second. First of all, very, very few people actually pay $200,000.
Right.
Okay. It doesn't actually work that way in practice.
Okay.
But we are a nonprofit, and we don't get tax money. We don't get grant money. We don't take government money. We're privately funded, and we're funded by our members. So you've heard of crowdfunding, where everybody puts in $10 to reach some scientific goal, and you get the first product if it works.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same idea, meaning you are giving very typically a portion of life insurance. You're assigning it to Alcor. So that's how I fund it. Like, I don't get free cryopreservation. I'm the president, and I don't get it for free. I got to pay for it. The way I pay for it is I have a portion of my life insurance that's assigned to Alcor at the time of my death. That will go to the costs. And like I said, we often lose costs, but we need the biological samples, and there's only one way to get them.
Right.
So that's what it is. And then for the neuro, like you talked about, right now I'm signed up as a neuro, so my team will cut my head off. And, we joke about it because I could just die randomly, right?
So
you got to have a little gallows humor for this job.
I guess.
But the point of it is the unfair advantage that I have that you guys don't know is that I know the other people that are signed up that are confidential. And these are the people that have changed the world, some of these people. Okay. I personally think it's kind of cool that my brain will end up as a CT scan in a textbook someday next to, like Einstein's brain was measurably different. They weighed it and they checked the volume, and he had certain parts of his brain that they think were different. But at the time, they didn't do CT scanning. They cut his brain up. And so we can't measure it anymore. It's lost to science. These are brains of people who are, objectively smarter than I am. And my brain is kind of like the control group. I'll be the normal person and they'll be the smart ones. I just think that's pretty cool because I think when I die, my body's not going to go for any useful purpose other than doing something like this. But I also know that according to the contracts that Alcor has, they can't sell my body to go use it for weapons testing. Okay.
Yeah, that got me
It's
emotional for some reason.
well, that's one use.
Yeah.
And we have to use it in that way. And we're obligated to under contract law. So there's two laws that are in effect. One is anatomical gift laws, and the other is a contract law. So when you give your body as an anatomical gift, you don't actually have any control over where it goes. In fact, they're very often cut up and sold. The parts are sold. When you do it with Alcor, there's a contractual obligation that we cannot do destructive testing of your remains. So if revival were ever possible, we're not in the revival business. Okay, I want to make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in the revival business. We're in the preservation business. We're going to preserve it as best as scientifically state-of-the-art as possible using today's emerging technology. If it's possible you can be revived down the road, your body will be available for that purpose without destructive testing being conducted. But in the meantime, we get to test it. We get to CT scan it. We CT scan the brains. We can take a biopsy that's not destructive. We can do a lot of things. And so that's very valuable, not just for this, but trauma medicine. There's trauma medicine applications that we're working on that you guys probably don't know about because the media doesn't talk about. But, in Arizona, people die of heat stroke all the time.
Yeah.
They try to climb this damn mountain in the summer. And, there's kids that are dying doing this. Heat stroke is eminently reversible if you can lower the body's core temperature quickly enough. Well, Alcor has some of the most complete data on how to lower core body temperature quickly in a controlled way, right? That's part of what we do all the time. And so there's applications of what we're researching to trauma medicine. There's applications for space travel. So any one of these guys that wants to go to distant galaxies, these billionaires all want to go to distant space, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have to medically hibernate the body, which really means stop metabolic processes, which is what bears do when they go into hibernation. We study that. We study the metabolic activity of the body as we're cooling the body, as we take samples, all very useful stuff for science. So that's what we're doing. That's how we fund it. If you fund it right, it's about 30 grand. If you buy a whole life policy and you fund it with recurring payments, it's about the cost of a funeral and a burial plot if you do it right.
Okay. Wow. So, I appreciate, having more control over where your body goes and the research that happens with it and, in the name of science, but in a positive way of science. This is definitely a different turn for longevity.
Well, it's actually, it's taking longevity to the next level.
Next level.
Right? Yeah. You don't want to follow up again on that question of space travel, because that was another thing that Fahey talked about. Talk a little bit more about that, because I think it's pretty fascinating. Because, I've heard, you get guys like Elon Musk and stuff who are talking about, how long it takes to travel and how, you basically, I don't even know that much about space travel. Maybe gives people an idea about like that concept, because I think it's pretty cool.
Well, we have a number of people at the higher, billionaire level that are interested specifically for that reason. For folks who don't know, you've kind of heard of warp speed and the speed of light, and all those sorts of things. And then if you know about what's called quantum mechanics or quantum physics, time loses meaning based on distance and travel, but it doesn't lose meaning in biological terms. So if you have to go to outside of our galaxy, in biological terms, that may take 200 years. Okay, so your body's going to age regardless, even if you're traveling 1,000,000 miles an hour, which seems like really fast, but biologically it doesn't matter. And so the concept is that if you are going to travel those distances, you have to protect against biological aging and you have to protect against radiation damage. For anybody who knows about space travel, there's actually, you're getting hit, your DNA is getting bombarded by radiation because you lack the protections of our atmosphere and other things. And by using ultra cold processes, it's believed that you can essentially stop or pause biological activity long enough to travel those great distances. And so that's another use for our processes. And we are exploring all that in our research. Alcor's unique because check this out, which is where I found myself as an operator. And it's really strange to be in this position. But you can have all the money in the world. You can have $200 billion, and it does not matter in terms of doing this research because it's a product of time, not money. Meaning, if you want to know what 50 years at liquid nitrogen temperatures looks like, you have to biologically have a 50-year-old sample. And it's only been in the last 10 or 15 years that these guys have really been in a serious position with like SpaceX and reusable rockets and had those complementary technologies to possibly go into deep space where they've said, hey, we might actually be able to achieve this in the next 50 years in terms of traveling that distance. But what about the biological components? Well, if you want to know what that looks like, there's only one organization on Earth that has 50-year-old biological samples at liquid nitrogen temperature, and that's Alcor, meaning a viable tissue. The intention was it was viable at the time of preservation. And so we found ourselves in a really remarkable position. I'm getting some people that by half their name. I'm not saying it's Musk or anybody else, but I'm getting people that of that are calling me, or they don't call me, their people call me, right? They have these teams of people, and they want to collaborate, or they want to get access to the data, or they're offering huge amounts of money, but we're a nonprofit. So I cannot just sell you that information. It belongs to the nonprofit. So we are in a really weird position to where in the last couple of years, I'm actually collaborating, working behind the scenes, talking to people. I'll be in Silicon Valley in 3 weeks for meetings, because we have something that they need and they can't get it any other way. So yeah, it's necessary for metabolic processes to stop and be slowed, and we're the ones that kind of know how to do it.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. I had one guy tell me, there was a show on called Scorpion. Have you ever heard of that, James?
No.
Okay. Well, I feel like I need to go and I didn't ever watch it either, but the guy who I guess it was based off of, he came up to me years ago, probably like 8 years ago, and he was telling me that he was working for the government basically, or having things done with the government based on this TV show, kind of like this was kind of a behind the scenes of what was going on, and that he was already able to tap into our consciousness. And he was telling me all these little things, like how he's going to live on forever and all the people. It was just so gnarly. And so when
yeah, that's a new
once you start talking about
way
living
of
forever,
isn't that crazy?
living forever is not true. That's not true.
I agree.
That's not true.
No,
Okay.
I know. It was well, the consciousness would live on. Yeah. Kind of like what you mentioned in the beginning as a aspiration.
Well, this I will tell you that there's stuff that's not public where they're able to access your brain directly and bypass your body functions to see electrical activity in the brain and to control robot arms and things like that. That's already being done. That takes billions of dollars to do. But those people who are doing that, these multi-billionaires, you know what they need? They need well-preserved brains too. We're in the preservation business, so they're in touch with us in some respects, at least. Because the notion is that your brain ultimately controls all this stuff. And if your body gives out, you have a heart attack. And Nikki, I want to ask you, you're in media, obviously. Your life's work is probably contained on a hard drive in a laptop somewhere. Okay. I'm going to guess, recordings of your shows and things you've done. If that keyboard on your laptop goes out, or better yet, the power control on your laptop, do you throw away the laptop?
No.
Right. What do you do?
I bring it to like a Geek Squad or something, and they get all the shit off the hard drive.
It's in the cloud, right? And then you download that stuff from the cloud right back onto new hardware. I think that's what you're getting at.
Well, no, well, that's
right?
partly, but also the point is you're not going to throw away the hard drive. Whatever you have to do, you're either going to download it, upload it, or you're going to pull the hard drive out and put it in a new laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're at the point in medicine now, which hasn't always been the case, including up until the 40s and 50s. Certain cultures actually thought that you needed your gut to exist. Like that was part of your consciousness, was actually in your stomach. You look at the Egyptian mummies, they took the brain out and put it in the stomach. I don't know if you know this.
Very interesting, based on a lot of episodes we're having about the mind gut,
the
and
biome.
the biome
Yes.
connection.
Yes.
So, I don't know. That's pretty interesting.
That actually originates in Eastern medicine.
Wow.
If you look into Eastern medicine and you look, the ancient Egyptians thought it was in the gut. Your soul was in the gut. But the point is I think medically we now, at a high scientific level, understand and agree that the brain contains your consciousness and character. It's influenced by other things, perhaps, but this is your hard drive. And my point is if one of your sensory inputs gives out, or your heart, which is designed to pump oxygen to your brain, why would you treat it worse than you treat your hard drive on your laptop?
Yeah, you got a point.
Preserve your hard drive.
Right.
Why not? What do you have to lose?
And there, honestly, to sum that all up, like, you just have to make sure to preserve your body. Like, that's exactly what we try and do here on the show, is just give people ways to have longevity. And I love what you're doing. This is incredible stuff. My mind is blown. I wish I had, like, I could step away and, like, process and come back.
I'm tour Alcor.
Are you serious? I will. Where is it at?
It's in Scottsdale, Arizona.
None. I'm not
kidding.
Man,
those freezers better not go out in there.
No, that's another misconception. We're not dependent on electricity at all.
Ooh, there you go.
All the power can go off and we're good for months.
Wow.
Because we're dependent on liquid nitrogen, and of course we have backup, multiple redundancies and all sorts of things. But I think this makes so much more sense. I mean, this is science fiction when we talk about it.
Sure.
When you come to our lab and you see it,
oh my God.
Especially, we love medical doctors. In fact, we're doing a training in 2 weeks where medical doctors are coming in. And we actually have a gross anatomy lab as part of that training to show how we're accessing the carotids. Yeah. I mean, we have neuroscientists, we have cardiothoracic surgeons come in.
I would love. We should go
you're
back.
welcome to come in. Yeah, I want you to come in. I'm begging you to come in, because
I'm
interesting
going.
stuff.
So much more sense.
I'm going. I really am going to
make a field trip.
I'm so excited. James, that's exciting. I'm really stoked. I'm going to really come there. You have no idea. I have family in Scottsdale, so I'm just going to come down and make a field trip out of it.
Make some good video.
I will.
Yes, you can take videos. We have these influencers. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to demystify this.
Okay.
And I'm trying to make it accessible, in particular for young people and women, in fact. In cryonics space and in the STEM sciences, we know there's a gross overrepresentation of males in particular. I can't tell you the number of young people that have come in, and not only young people, but some of these billionaires heard about Alcor, like in Popular Mechanics when they were 15. And part of the space bug that they got was imagining being, cryopreserved. You see it with Han Solo in the Star Wars, right? He was cryopreserved in the black ice. That spurred their imagination to get involved in the science that they then helped develop for the world. And so when young people come in, we have a couple of women on our deployment teams that are just rock stars. We have one, she's like one of the youngest fire captains in the country and just a complete badass in terms of recoveries. She's out there getting bodies, all over the world.
That's really cool.
It's awesome. And I love to show people that.
Great. So I'm coming. Well, I'm going to come. So when we're going to wrap this up, and you're going to tell me, or I'm going to get your information, and I'm going to come, period.
Yep.
Fantastic.
All of you.
Yeah, James, James, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been really fun.
Sure. Well, come. I want doctors. So
okay.
I'll drag him with me.
All right. We'll look forward to seeing you guys. I'll host you.
Yay. Thanks, James. That's awesome. We'll totally do this.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
See you later.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with our healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junkie. Time for our healthy takeout.
Well,
my brain's on the floor right now.
You want to talk longevity? Yes.
I mean, that is longevity, is it not?
Yeah, right. No, it's really fascinating because, it sounds again like he's getting at is it sounds so science fiction, jets and stuff. But I mean, gosh, look how fast things are moving right now. It is really crazy. And we don't know what's going to be possible. I was trying to, I was, sort of looking up some of the research on this offline while he was talking because I was just curious myself. But, the reason I was asking him about like vitrification of live people, right? Or not like people, but live organisms was because to me, that's like, that would give a lot of evidence of like the viability of the idea. Because if you just kind of took a rabbit and you infused it and it was frozen basically for a week and you just brought it back or a year and you brought it back.
Right.
And it was
shows it works.
Then that really shows that that could potentially work. At the organ level, it does seem to be very, very possible right now. But that's very different than an entire human being. So I looked it up. So like they can do it in like worms. Yeah, you can do it in worms. In fact, remember that.
How long are they like cryopreserved? Because I feel like that's a long ass time if we're thinking.
Okay, well, listen, so Joel Rothman, remember from our first show, a professor at UC Santa Barbara, in his lab, he's got worms, these C. elegans worms that you do that are very common in research. And he's got some sitting in there from like 30 or 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And he thaws them out and he starts using them again. So, that's so in these lower animals like that, I think and it says, they've done it maybe in some small frogs and some fruit fly. I mean, that's a huge difference between
human body.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a little different for sure. Well, a lot different.
Yeah. So
I like the aspiration. I think it's
for
cool.
sure.
I think it's cool if first of all, actually, here, I'm going to start here. I got really weirdly emotional when he talked about how when we donate our organs, like you put that sticker on your driver's license if you're in America, that you could be like, your body can go and be strapped to a tree and get blown up. I literally started crying.
I think that's different I think organ donation is different from donating your body to science. Period. So I think what he's talking about, if you're donating your body to science, then it can go anywhere. Right.
And they make sure that it goes to more of a specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
But still, that was pretty crazy because I had not really heard about that. I did not appreciate that, learning that at all.
Yeah. And
I do like, you guys were talking about organ transplants and like I love that idea. I love being able to help somebody else live a healthier, longer life through, I don't know, from my contribution type thing. So I would like I wouldn't mind being frozen in that sense to then help somebody in the long term. I think it's very aspirational and cool to think about the consciousness. Now, do I think the person's going to come back just as they are? No.
Personally. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how.
I don't know, but I don't think so.
Who knows?
Because our soul is a whole thing. Like our soul, our consciousness, in my opinion, that's what I believe in. Like I do believe in past lives. Like I do believe in all that. So if this vehicle dies and I go back to whatever the hell that is and I, reincarnate into something else, how the hell am I how is that going to work? Like that's what's tripping me out.
I mean, that's the thing is like, again, like they're just taking his head, right? Yeah, and the idea is they're going to like potentially, attach him onto a robot or something like that.
It's so gnarly.
I mean, and if you think about it, it's like what things we can do already are pretty miraculous, right?
No,
like
exactly. That's why it just blows my mind.
On and stuff like that. But anyway, so good stuff. Interesting show.
It all comes back to just preserving our body. Like you said, our hard drive, like we just have to preserve our body. We have to take the healthy steps and really, we have to care. We have to really take care of our bodies and, Yeah.
Well, and the longer you
Longevity.
live, the longer you live, the more possibility you have benefiting from all this,
That's true.
these advances. So
Very true.
anyway, good
Pretty
show.
crazy.
You want to read us out?
Yes, of course. Longevity Junkie is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Dr. Buck Joffrey, and Phil Ferragamo. We're distributed by our friends at ACAST. See you next time.